know. I thought we could do a switcheroo, but no, yeah. So I'm Dr. Newman. I'm the director of the BMW Center for German and European Studies, and I'm going to ask the president a few questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So first of all, I want to thank you for your remarks, which I thought were very, I don't want to say blunt, but they were to the point, and they are addressing these really major shifts in the transatlantic relationship, and where we need to fight, I think, and put in a little bit of elbow grease to get things done. I wanted to just kind of follow up on two different pieces. So the first is there was a speech that President von der Leyen gave on Saturday where she was addressing what Europe needs to do in what she described as a fundamental shift in the international order, where markets are no longer just about prosperity, but also vulnerability, and where states were weaponizing interdependencies against each other. And this goes kind of against the fundamental pillars that we always assume of the transatlantic relationship, where trade just brings prosperity and peace. And I'm wondering, for the next generation, what can be the building blocks? I agree with her fundamental assessment, but then what is the basis of this partnership in a world where there are these contradictions built into these types of economic relationships?
Well, I think that speech came from a result of very difficult thought processes that we went through last week, where prime ministers, heads of state and government got together and said, look, where can we go forward in terms of, in this case, crippling further Russia's war machine, which is cynically using everything it has in order to bomb Kiev every day, to where autocracies are quite brazenly trying to disrupt everything we've built in countries that are in our immediate neighborhood, but also in countries that are further away but impact us. To what do we mean by open trade, when it is very clear that some countries would seek market dominance at the expense of others. And that is a completely opposite to anything we studied, we've grown up with, because trade should be seen as a win-win for everybody, consumers across the world, companies across the world, free flow of economy, people and capital. And we tend, and this is not a new thing, to sometimes feel comfort in doing the opposite. And I think as Europe, having looked back in the last 5 years, where we were first thrown into an unprecedented pandemic, where walls were rebuilt rather than brought down, to a war on our continent, and to, yes, a complicated relationship with our allies. I also want to say that complicated relationship, that sort of crisis management that we're dealing with, has also led us Europeans to get out of our comfort zone. A comfort zone where for many years we thought somebody else would solve our problems, where the US would come in whenever we were in trouble, where we let our defense expenditure slide, and where we thought those countries that were pretty, unpredictable in our neighborhood could still provide us with cheap sources of energy. And against that background, we need to see how we're going to navigate. How are we going to redivest into clean energy, but also, understandably, rely on others for what we used to rely on from Russia? Two, how do we expand on a relationship which is quite complex with China, where you have market dominance, an inability to compete, but also a challenging narrative that you need to overcome. But this also means, and that was, I think, sort of the conclusion of the president's speech, is that means we need to seek allies where we were otherwise complacent and not doing so. So we're signing trade deals across the world. We're going towards, hopefully, adopting the Mercosur agreement at the end of the year. we need to go, as a legislature, go through the US trade deal within our House, and we will do our scrutiny work, etc. But it is a sort of a wake-up call that is not necessarily driven by a negative outlook, but a crisis management with a new way of dealing with problems we were ignoring. And we were, I would say, that gave us pause, but also it spurs us on to do what we haven't done for too long.
Great. Well, I'm excited to see that work because I think it's, I mean, it is, yeah, because it is a really remarkable just turn, you know, to think about from the four freedoms to, you know, that world to this world and how Europe has pivoted so quickly. I wanted to shift gears to a completely different conversation, which was your pitch for democracy. And I think we at Georgetown, you know, we get a lot of you know, ambassadors and leaders, and they always say, you know, we need democracy, the rule of law, you know, these different fundamental Western ideas. But I worry that for the next generation, those words really have lost meaning. And so often, as you mentioned, democracy is hard work, and it often doesn't produce, let's say, fast results. It never maybe doesn't optimize on the quick solution right away. But how do you describe, in just very simple language, what is at stake? What would happen in a world where democracy is lost for, like, your average citizen, and why should they commit to this really abstract idea about governance, which is often, you know, I'm already bored. Do you know what I mean? So, like, how can you make that feel so real? Because the other side has very real, you know, like, things they're saying that really, you know, frighten you right away. And so I'm just wondering if you can give us a picture that could be used as marching orders for how to enliven that conversation for the next generation.
So I was a law student for a huge amount of my academic career. And I'm the sister of two scientists who never would have used the words rule of law in any conversation. And I remember in my first days and weeks of being elected, having moved from government to a legislature, thinking, how am I going to explain rule of law to my audience and try to convince them to vote for me again? And I just realized that what had happened is, because we were going through a period of quite calm prosperity, that we started taking things for granted. That you knew you'd always going to have independent journalism until a journalist was blown up in my country. That you thought you would have free academic institutions until science started to be questioned. And so my responsibility and my answer to that was, now I could either just ignore it and think that my voters are always going to turn up on election day, or actually properly say there is a problem with not tackling that subject. So I chose that at my peril. There were some hard elections I needed to run for, where we were facing particularly difficult challenges in my constituency, and that I had to push back. And I said, look, I stand for the complete opposite of what you are saying. Sometimes we would be on a similar panel like this with other candidates standing for completely different things. And my fear is that when I go to schools today, is that the audience would say, there's no way I'm going to go through that hassle. That I'm going to, you know, have an easy job in the private sector and just, let's say, focus on my personal income. And my worry is that less and less, especially women, will choose what is a very, very difficult career. What is however, the upshot of that? The upshot is that you can get, you know, some of the best results when you stand, as I did in Moldova, in front of 100,000 people waving European flags in a country that is not in the European Union, saying that we want to join. When I stood in a few days after Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine in Kiev, a bustling city that was empty, with a curfew, surrounded, I said, this is worth it. And I want to encourage as many people as possible to see this. Because people who live here look to us to open a door wide open for them. Would have been easier for me not to do that. But I'm convinced that the more inspirational a project and a dream is presented, then everything else, the decision-making, the length of time it sometimes takes, the dreams that you need to pursue become possible. And I'm still completely convinced of that. And it is something because I come from a country that for a long time wanted to join the European Union. It took a long time for us to do that. For the simple reason that we thought and we believe still, that those fundamental things that we took for granted, that I mentioned at the beginning, would be protected. And that for many young people around the world, that is the hope that keeps them going. What I want to make sure is that they continue voting for it. Because if they don't, then those who vote for the complete opposite of what they believe in will win. And if we don't fight that, we will become the minority. And I need to fight every day to do that. Is it hard? Yes. But there are enough people who are willing to do so. At the end of the day, is whether you have the courage and the political will to take a step forward, even when it's hard. There are days when you say, have I managed? And I say, maybe not so much. I need to try harder. I have 4 sons, 2 of them vote. And, you know, they ask me these questions every day. And they don't study about rule of law. They study different things. But they are also, I need to make sure that whatever I do makes it possible for them to continue believing as I believed. And my parents did.
I recently heard this expression that the beginning of authoritarianism is author, and that the whole point is the leader is the author, and we lose our agency. That the whole point is that we are not allowed to have our own individual narratives or our own futures. I thought that was a very persuasive, it stuck with me, that image of like, we are written out of the narrative. Not to be too Hamilton focused, you know, like for those people that like the musical, but, you know, it's like, we want to have our own story, we want to have our own future, and if a leader is taking that over, then how can any of that be possible for us? But I thought that was just a nice frame for what I think is essentially at the heart of your comments. I wanted to take some questions, and we have, I don't know, about 15 minutes. I'm looking, 15 minutes. And so I would love to get, I see a hand in the back, I would love to get a student as our first question. I'm going to put a student on the spot because you have a story to tell too. Yes, please. No, yes, yeah.
We can collect them because I talk a lot. So
yes, okay, maybe let's take two or three questions. I would like to get 2 students, force you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for putting me on the spot here. I'm Maurice. I'm a German student at the McCourt School of Public Policy and also the president of the European Policy Organization. So thank you for being here, first of all. And my question is about the institutional role of the European Parliament. I sometimes feel it's very hard to explain European policy to like the average voter in Europe, especially if Brussels always seems like a little bit further away. And I see that you're doing quite a bit on communicating European policy a little bit better. But I'm curious, do you think there are like any possible changes to like the EU governance, the EU treaties or framework, which you see possible in like the next 5 years to get like the European Brussels bubble a little bit closer to the people? Thank you.
Great. I'm going to take one more question over here.
Buongiorno Presidente Metsola, grazie per essere qui. My name is Zubin Battaglia. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service. I really appreciated your remarks, which were really on the point, and especially the remark that the center, to hold, to be strong, it must deliver. And something that stuck to me was also something that Professor Newman said. It's harder for the center and democratic process to deliver the quick solutions that are here. And it seems that we do have a set of solutions for Europe, especially in the context of the competitiveness problem. And A question I wanted to ask you is, what are the political challenges to pursue this plan, and how do you think the center can go about to pursue it?
All right. So, Brussels bubble, I hate that word. Oh. I try to get out of it as much as possible, which is why I'm here. But it's a legitimate question, because we tend to, and I see it here as well, to be clear, our processes are not always the most, let's say, inaopaque. Our processes are sometimes full of acronyms that nobody knows what they stand for. People don't know who their members are. We have different ways that members are elected. So I come from an electoral system where it's a pretty hard job to get elected and get to convince people when you knock on their door that they will give you their vote. But then once they give you the vote, you are held accountable to them and you need to deliver because you've met them in person. So I think there is also a difference in countries as to how MEPs, members of the European Parliament, engage with their constituents in order to deliver on what is essentially important for them. But make no mistake, if we're going to spend 5 years, because our legislative mandate is a little bit longer than members of Congress, I spent a lot of time with Congress members yesterday, where, you know, if you have a 2-year cycle, it's a very different one to us, where you have 5 years of implementing legislation, doing things that matter, but realizing that if you don't explain it, or if you ignore the fundamental challenges that someone like you would be telling us about it, then we're not doing our job. So I think we need to be much more present as European politicians on the ground. So I get to go to Germany quite a lot. We need to understand that there are certain sectors of the German economy that is not doing well. We also need to see that there is a rise in political discourse in Germany that needs to be countered. We also need to understand that the hopes and dreams of big parts of Germany, when the wall came down, have not been realized yet. And that has to be said, and we need to be honest about it, and that we don't only discuss this when an election rolls around. We also need, and I will link it to the second question, is that, you know, the political center doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be always so predictable. But perhaps what we didn't do enough over the last years, and I come from that center, is that we forgot the fundamental needs of our citizens. And if our citizens are telling us, look, we need to make sure that in Europe you have access to a good job that you can be happy doing. 2, that you have a roof over your head that gives you dignity. And 3, that it's safe to walk in the street. If you can't answer those 3 from the center, then you have failed. And I think for a very long time, the establishment parties stopped talking about these 3 fundamental issues. The agenda was different, we were going through prosperity, etc., but you stopped talking about the basics. And that is what I think we need to recapture. We also went perhaps too far, too fast, we talk about slowness, etc., on certain parts of the legislation that could not be implemented. That with our own rules, we were making it impossible, still are, for some of our companies to compete. That it is still practically impossible unless you have a lot of capital in Europe to start a company and grow it. That it is still impossible to move capital from one market to another. So we see the US rushing. We see, frankly, in an AI race, I don't like to call it a race, but it's okay, in an AI field where, you know, a very, very different value set is in China is rushing. Where are we? So if we can answer those questions, then I think we will be able to say that that bubble is a little bit broader and includes the member countries and everybody who lives in it, but that also we have not forgotten what the very basic needs of our citizens are, and that we need to be honest about it if we have let them down. It's another thing we didn't do enough of. We thought, you know, our way would be easy to understand and could be convinced. No way, and no more.
Great. Okay, I'm going to take 2 more questions. Kate and the man in the back.
20 hands.
Yeah, there's a lot. Oh, sorry. Okay, and then we'll go with
Wonderful.
you. 3 questions.
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your really inspiring emphasis on democracy that I think is so important for all of us to hear and keep in mind. But I have a question actually following up on the questions of the EU moving to be a security actor, right? The EU was founded as a really pacific project, right? Rejecting all of the kind of warfare that had ravaged the continent. And I work on this issue today, and I'm always struck by, even though I see a lot of things happening in the EU, the skepticism on the part of a lot of people that the EU can actually and will actually emerge as a much more sort of military power. So I'm curious, from your perspective where you sit as EP president, what you see, if you had to choose one thing that you see as the sort of biggest obstacle that needs to overcome for the EU to really have that standalone military capacity, what it would be. Thank you.
Great. Yes, in the back.
Hello, my name is Warren Garlick. I'm a retired federal financial regulator. Thank you for your remarks. I appreciated your candor, and it builds on what the last questioner was just asking about the military. So you mentioned going up to 5%, but I mean, let's be real. Except for Poland and some tiny other countries, no one really thinks that's realistic. I just was at a lecture a few months ago with a top Spanish official here on campus, and he said it wouldn't be until the mid-2030s that they could even get to 2% due to their high deficits. And I think most people think that 2 to 3% is more or less where they're going to land. I mean, and even then you have games being played like Italy claiming that the longest bridge in the world that they're building to Sicily is part of their military, you know, things like that. So, but my question then comes to, I mean, do you think the policymakers in the EU really understand like the resentment that Americans feel? Like my brother in Berlin, Germany, he pays only 30% taxes. He has the same income as me, basically. We pay 52% when you take state, local property taxes, Social Security, and things like that. We pay a higher tax rate, which people in Europe would be surprised about. We get no benefits. We don't have free tuition. We don't have free health care. We have none of these things. And I don't, like when I heard that Spanish official, I just, you know, and he's talking about, well, we have deficits. I mean, I don't think they get the resentment that Americans feel that they've been paying more than their fair share. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more question here.
We can gather a few more, and then I will need to go. So yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Madam President. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Matilda. I'm from Portugal. I'm a master student of policy here at Georgetown. I find your speech and your approach rare, and I think it's exactly what we need right now. I've been trying to find a model for that. And one of the things that you mentioned was that we should fight the people that are trying to, we fight them with facts and action. And I came here to study statistics and economics, so in search of doing precisely that. What do we do when people don't want to hear the facts, and when maybe we're being accused of elitism, or even when facts are hard to find? and hard to decipher. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take one more. Is that okay to put one more on your plate?
Sure,
it's a lot of things. Yes, the next row.
It's only my guys who are like panicking.
Yeah, let's make them panic. Let's put them into panic.
I can stay.
Hi, welcome to Georgetown. Thank you for speaking with us. I'm a third year from Ukraine, and I want to say thank you for everything you
I know who you are.
Thank you for what you said and your undying support. And I would like to ask, you're very inspiring for women, for people who are interested in politics. How do we fight the misinformation and the propaganda and everything that the news is flooded when sometimes it's hard to even recognize it ourselves? And thank you.
Great.
You are here now. I know.
Thank you for coming.
I see another familiar face back there. Look, I have one of my constituents is back there. I'm recognizing faces. I hope he still is my constituent. You still are, right, Christine? Yeah. Okay, good. You haven't lost your vote yet, no? Very good.
I also, from some of your remarks, I got the sense that you have, that the EU needs to pull back on some regulation. And China and the US are running ahead in AI. But I am very worried because, just in the case of AI, countries are building systems that are supposed to create super intelligence. They don't know what the motives of those systems are, and they don't really know how they operate. And so I often think, yes, it might be economically difficult for Europe, but it is the responsible thing to do, because if you build a system that has super intelligence and its motive is self-maintenance, it's not a good setup for humanity. And I think just that simple story, I don't know why China and the US are racing ahead with these technologies. I think it's quite dangerous. And so I just hope that as economic incentives put pressure on Europe in many of these domains, whether it's AI or climate or the future of technology, Europe is taking very reasonable positions. Anyway, that's a
Thank
big...
you for telling me that. I've been receiving the opposite information for the past 3 days. Very nice. I will take that.
No, but I want Europe to come here and tell us why Europe's position is actually... We should be adopting it rather than Europe should, we need to deregulate and we need to liberalize. I mean, yes, things like capital union. There are simple stories of where the EU has these barriers internally. It should get rid of them. But on these, fundamental about safety and the consumer, I feel like that's a place where democracy can deliver for the citizens in a very simple story of they're creating super intelligence that just wants to maintain itself, and we don't know why it works. I mean, that is... Anyway, I don't want to dominate. There were many good questions, but I just think I don't want the EU to give up on this thing that it's at the
We're
forefront
very good at that.
of.
We won't give up. So, but what we need to do, however, first of all, we're calling it simplification, not deregulation, simply because we have realized that we've made things unworkable for a number of our companies. And we don't want them to come here and lose them all, so to be clear. The reality is, however, that only around 15% of our AI graduates stay in Europe. The rest come here. We want them to come back because the simple reason is that the AI development is going to happen whether we do anything or not. So the decision that we took on an EU level is that we should create a framework which identifies abuse. We were still are particularly worried about in manipulation of voter behavior, impersonation, complete takeover of a political narrative online with the social media onslaught that we face. But neither should we ignore the fact that technologically AI can revolutionize the way we teach, our healthcare systems, our banking systems, etc. So the framework is also being adopted here to a certain extent in terms of practice. So we see that as a good thing, as long as we don't end up being, let's say, handcuffing ourselves into developing further. So we see that framework as a positive thing. The UK has looked into what we're doing. Some of the actors here are doing that, Australia, New Zealand as well. What we don't want, however, is to make sure that, you know, we create a framework and then we lose out. That's a reality. Now, social media is not real life. Can I say that? You know, it is particularly hard. You know, my mother still reads all the comments for her underneath every single post I upload. It is almost impossible. I have no idea why she does that, but she does. And it's pretty hard for her. So I would just say, go on. You know, just believe in yourself. And don't ignore, counter the narrative, and you will get through. And you'll be surprised that most of the counter narrative and the propaganda is not real. Okay, just don't give up on that. It took me a long time to learn that, but it's such a small percentage. Tony Blair once said, you know, it's 1% of the, and he said it in our parliament, 1% of the UK population is online and writing nasty comments, but 1% is 650,000 people. That's a pretty lot of people to comment under your post. So just put that into context, okay? And keep shouting out at them. Just keep on, don't worry. I see I cannot say it's healthy, it's a very different narrative here, you know, also young people, how they engage, it's quite difficult, but also my kids show it to me, how different it is also from here to Europe. But it's louder and you have a conversation, which sometimes we don't have enough of in Europe, especially when it comes to an anti-Ukrainian narrative that is manufactured. Manufactured, we will fight it back. Security. You know, my husband is from Finland. He doesn't want to be told that he's not doing enough. That's a country that has been spending more than 5% for many years. Even when they were alone, outside of NATO, with a 1,040-kilometer border with Russia. 100 years after almost a third of their territory was lost. Have all the other countries done that? No. But just because they're smaller does not mean they're not important. Do I wish that the bigger countries have done more and have listened? Because at the end of the day, and I will finish with your question, is that, of course, we should have done more earlier and better. We have different types of weapon systems when compared to the US, could lower costs, make us more interoperable, make it easier for the Ukrainians when we give them equipment. Is there a discussion in many countries to reintroduce obligatory military service? Yes. Could it have been done earlier? Maybe, but we're doing it. Are there countries, in one particular which you mentioned, that is on a different, let's say, stream? That's not the rest. There are countries that pay more taxes than you do here in the European Union. So you can also ask them, including some from the north. My biggest, I would say, surprise. So I've been in politics for a very long time. I grew up in it. I ran many elections. I didn't get elected, and then I finally did. Now I do all right. But I was mostly surprised that when I stood up and said Russia should not have invaded Ukraine, the government of my country called me a warmonger. And I remember thinking, wow. So that means that peace means something completely different to what I think it is. And I realized that that different opinion to mine was a common one. That the further you come as a country from a conflict zone, the more exonerated from responsibility over that peace you feel. So I knew that I had to fight back with difficulty. It's been very hard. But not to let go of the moral clarity of what you think with the word peace. That being prepared also militarily, does not mean that you are fighting. That when you talk about peace through strength, it also acts as a deterrent. For many years, governments did the complete opposite, thinking that someone else, going back to what I first said, was going to save them. So we have countries in Europe that are neutral, but some of those neutral countries have invested quite a lot in their defense. So I have been very surprised with that narrative. I've combated it, to use a very apt word, as a verb. But I've also realized that we need to fight harder in order to be able to say that if we are going to be prepared, it also means because we want to maintain peace and not the opposite. And that does not come naturally to many countries. And that is what I think we need to do better at, in order for us to meet the obligations that we have, but also to counter what the gentleman said is resentment. That word is painful because, yes, it is understandable, but I just would like to make sure that that resentment ebbs, because we're doing a lot. We could always do more, but we're on the same page. So don't give up on us, just yet, I would say.
Great. If we could thank the president for those comments. My research is about how the global economy has been weaponized. And anyway, I think it's very...
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.